Here. We're going to go back to our study of 1 Thessalonians. This week I want to look at 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, verses 11 through 12. I'll read starting verse 11. And to aspire to live a quiet life, and to attend to your own business, and to work with your hands, just as we commanded you, so that you may live decently towards those outside and may have need of nothing. Now, my apologies for not having the handouts today. I would have had to recreate it when we got home this morning on the computer, and I just didn't have time. So I've got a backup computer, but it didn't have the material on it. So I'll try and send you a copy in the email or something like that. Okay, so this week we want to look at the idea of work as it relates to the Christian. Notice in this passage there is a number of different elements, if you like, in these two verses. First, to aspire to live a quiet life. From the context, that seems to mean not trying to run everyone else's life, but just getting on with your own life and leaving other people to get on to theirs if that's what's required. A little bit ambiguous as to what a quiet life is, but it's certainly not charging around organising everyone else. The second part, attend to your own business, which I think is quite good. Your main concern is with what relates to you. You can help other people, but as a Christian, to some extent, that's your own business. But notice here it says to attend to your own business. There's no use trying to tell everyone else how to do their job if your business or your activity is failing, which sometimes does happen. Sometimes you'll get people who seem to know everything about everything, but they can't do anything for themselves. And I've certainly met people like that. And then the next part, and to work with your hands. When we talk about working with your hands, we're probably in general talking about trades, things like that, not talking about academic work. But when you think about it, working with your hands includes most things, in fact. If you're a writer, in some way you're using your hands to produce that manuscript you're working on. Or if you're working on a computer, you're still using your hands. So to me, it's a pretty general term. I think it's saying you do your own job. I think really that's what it's saying. So live a quiet life, attend to your own business, working with your hands. So you get on with your job. And then the next part, just as we commanded you, so that, and now it gets into the reasons why we should be taking care of our own business, our own job. We should be working, etc. And so you may live decently towards those outside. It seems like in the context that's talking about not be dependent on those outside, or not be constantly begging from those outside the church. And outside there is talking about outside the church. So the reason we as Christians should be working ourselves is so that we may live decently towards those outside and have need of nothing, which is somewhat interesting. Now, we're going to look at somewhat of the history of why work isn't always easy. Most people don't absolutely love their work. They don't wake up in the morning and say, oh, I can't wait to get to work. I remember when I was a farmer, you had to do it. You just accepted you had to do it. If you didn't go out and get the cows in and milk them, you'd have all sorts of problems. So as a general rule, we work because we have to work. We work because we need the money to survive. And to an extent, that's what this previous passage is talking about. We may have need of nothing. So while in a sense working is a command in a sense, but it's also a very practical thing. If we don't work, we don't earn money, and especially that would apply in Jesus' time. They didn't have the sort of system we've got today where if people are unemployed, there's an unemployment money you can draw, or if you're ill, You know, you can get a sickness benefit. They just didn't have that. If you didn't work, you didn't get paid. You were dependent on your relatives, on friends, on someone else. And that from this, it seems that's not what God wants from us. He wants to be able to depend on ourselves to supply our own living. Okay, but let's just have a little look at the history of work. Genesis 2 and verse 15. And Yahweh God took the man and set him in the Garden of Eden to cultivate it and to keep it. So right from the beginning, man was appointed to work. And I'm not sure here you can differentiate between man and woman. Logically, I'm not sure that you can. So he placed man in the Garden of Eden to cultivate it and keep it. So right from the beginning, man was given a work. Seems like in the beginning it wasn't a difficult work. We'll see that in the next passage. It became difficult sometime later. We don't know how long later. Okay, so Genesis chapter 3, verses 17 through 19. And to Adam he said, because you listened to the voice of your wife, and you ate from the tree from which I forbade you to eat, the ground shall be cursed on your account. In pain you shall eat from it all the days of your life. So the fact that work is onerous, is difficult, it doesn't just logically all fall into place and we all get rich, was in a sense a curse because of man's sin. It says, in pain you shall eat from it all the days of your life. Work is going to become hard work. Doesn't mean we shouldn't do it, it just means it's not going to be easy. Verse 18, and thorns and thistles shall sprout for you, and you shall eat the plants of the field. I remember on the farm, one of the jobs that never stopped was to get rid of ragwort on the farm. Whether we pulled it out or dug it out or sprayed it, you know. And that's certainly a coincidence if you're trying to grow a garden and grow vegetables, that the weeds seem more prolific than the plants. At least in my garden they are. It's a constant struggle to keep them down. But that's part of man's history. And then by the sweat of your brow you shall eat bread until you return to the ground. In other words, this work isn't really going to stop until you die. For from it you were taken, for you are dust, and from the dust you shall return. I was going to say something, but I better not. I was going to blame the woman for work being hard, but really it's not her fault. It's just the way it turned out. Man was silly enough to take her advice. So, you know, he's got to bear some of the blame. Now, when it comes, I want to just look at a few statements in the Old Testament before we get on to the New Testament. Proverbs 18 and verse 9. Even he who is slack in his work, he is brother to a master of destruction. There's a whole lot of passages that deal with laziness, basically. People who aren't willing to work in the Old Testament. So this is one. He who is slack in his work, in other words, who doesn't take his work seriously, he is brother to a master of destruction. So one who is destructive is more like marauding tribes who come in and destroy what you've tried to build up and take off. But this passage is saying the guy who doesn't do his work properly is a little bit the same as those guys. We would think that the marauder was way worse, but in fact, from a biblical point of view, you could even say the person who doesn't do his work properly. Then Ecclesiastes 2, verses 24, there is nothing better for a person than to eat and drink and find delight in his toil. For I also realize that this is from the hand of God. In other words, to take advantage of this opportunity to work is a real advantage for us. Nothing better for a person than to eat and drink and find delight in his toil. This is something I've tried to get through to the kids, not very successfully. But one thing I discovered when I used to work on the farm, when I used to run my father's dairy farm, I used to find milking cows tremendously boring. All you did is put the cups on one cow. We had a herringbone shed, so you had a line of about 10 or 12, I can't remember how many now, cows down one side, another line down the other side. You put them down on one side, went back the other end, put them down on the other side, got new cows in, did the same thing for about an hour and a half. And that was boring. But what I did was find ways to make that, what was essentially a boring process, interesting. And actually I enjoyed it far more, but I had to intellectually find a way to make it more interesting. So what I basically did was, well, how quickly can I get through all these cows? So the aim of milking the cows was not to take it from one cow to the other, it was how quickly can I do the whole process. And interestingly enough, production went up. I'm not quite sure why. The old way of doing it was to, keep pulling down on the cups until they seem like you've got every last drop of milk out. But that takes a long time. So to go fast, all you do is put the cups on, go down the end, put the cups on that row, zip through. Doesn't matter how far the cows got, zip them through. And actually production went up. But that process made it so much more interesting to me. We can always find ways even to make boring work interesting. And I think this is to an extent what this is talking about. We can make our work interesting in some way. We've got to find, we may have to think of it or view it in a different way, but it is possible to do it. There is nothing better than for a person than to eat and drink and find delight in his work. And he says, for I also realize that this is from the hand of God. For us to be able to enjoy our work or find a way to enjoy our work is from God as well. He gave us the hard bit, but he also gave us the ability to take advantage and enjoy the work that we do. Okay, let's get back on this subject of laziness, because the Bible actually does have a lot to say on it. Prepare your work in the street and get it ready for yourself in the field. Afterward, sorry, I didn't give you the verse. Proverbs 24, verses 27 and then 30 through to 34. Prepare your work in the street and get it ready for yourself in the field. In other words, make preparation for the work you're going to do. You don't sow your field in the street, but you can do a lot of things that you can get ready to do, so that when you do actually do the work, you can do it fairly quickly. Afterward, then you shall build your house. That's kind of an interesting statement. If you do your work successfully, possibly this is saying then you're going to have the opportunity to build this house you want. What you want is the house. What you use is your work to achieve having this house. Okay, verse 30. I passed by the field of a lazy person and over the vineyard of a person lacking sense. And behold, it was overgrown. He could be referring to my garden, at least part of my garden. So I passed by the field of a lazy person over the vineyard of a person lacking sense, and behold, it was overgrown. All of it was covered with thorns, its surface with nettles, and its stone wall was broken down. You can just imagine that sort of a field. And I myself saw and my heart considered. What did the writer of Proverbs learn from this experience of looking at the sky's field? A little sleep, a little slumber, a little folding of the hands for rest. And your poverty will come running, and your lack like an armed warrior. If you prefer sleep to working, that's what's going to happen. We've got to have a reasonable amount of sleep, but if you prefer an excessive amount of sleep rather than getting out and working, it says poverty will come upon you like an armed warrior. Beautiful expression. And then Proverbs chapter 26, verses 12 through 16. Do you see a man wise in his own eyes? There is more hope for a fool than for him. A lazy person, he's referring to the lazy person, he's a fool because he's not making use of the abilities and the time which God has given him. A lazy person says, a lion is in the road. In other words, he's always coming up with excuses for why he shouldn't do what he should be doing. A lazy person says, a lion is in the road, a lion among the streets. In other words, I'm staying inside. I'm not going outside to work in the field. There's lions everywhere. Something could eat me. The door turns on its hinge and the lazy person on his bed. That's kind of interesting. A lazy person buries his hand in the dish In other words, he makes an attempt to eat, but he is too lazy to return it to his mouth. This is an extremely lazy person. Can't be even bothered lifting the food to his mouth. A lazy person is wiser in his own eyes than 7 who answer discreetly. So this guy thinks he knows everything. He knows that there's a lion out there going to kill him, so he's not going to get out there. But a person who answers discreetly, he's more inclined to figure out what's needed. Maybe there's a way of getting rid of the lion so that you can actually do the field. Because in the end, if you don't do the field, you're not going to get the food you need. Ecclesiastes 10 and verse 18. Through sloth the roof sinks in, and through idleness of hands the house leaks. That's a pretty good one. If you don't get on to the maintenance when it's needed, then you'll have problems with the house. I don't know why, but he's grinning at me. But all of these things are supposed to help motivate us to do things that we shouldn't be doing, or we should be doing rather. Okay. Now, from the New Testament point of view, what does the New Testament have to say about work? We turn to 2 Thessalonians 3, 10 through 11. For even when we were with you, we used to command this to you, that if anyone does not want to work, neither should he eat. Now notice there it says anyone does not want to work. That doesn't mean someone who for various reasons is unable to work. And there are people certainly who are genuinely unable to work. For a while I was in that category. For a year or so I was on a sickness benefit. I was getting migraines every week or 2 weeks. I just couldn't function at all. And there are genuinely people, it wasn't because I didn't want to work, I just physically couldn't do it. As soon as I had a day working, the next day I'd be serious headaches and I just couldn't function. So for that period of time, I wasn't able to work. I'm still not able to do a lot of things, but I have able to find a way of making an income by doing things that I can do. And all of us have got things that we can do. Just because we can't go out and dig ditches or can't go out and work on the computer all day doesn't mean there isn't something that you can do. And we need to find that. If we genuinely can't work, I don't think this is talking about those people. So if anyone does not want to work. And verse 11, for we hear that some among you are living irresponsibly, working at nothing, but being busybodies, which is completely against what the passage in 1 Thessalonians 4 was talking about. So working at nothing, in other words, not doing anything, they're lazy, they're just hanging around. Another expression for them, I think, was market people. There's a Greek word for lazy, it's market people. People just hang around the market all day doing nothing. But being busybodies, verse 12, now we command and we exhort such people in the Lord Jesus Christ that working with quietness, they eat their own bread. So we need to make every effort to be able to support ourselves, if at all possible. If it's not possible, that's fair enough. But if it is possible to support ourselves, we should make every effort to do that, to eat our own bread. Verse 13, but as for you, brothers, do not be discouraged while doing what is right. It seems like one of the problems that some of the people in Thessalonica had were that because they so much believed that the second coming was imminent, they'd given up working. And they were just hanging around. I think in 2 Thessalonians, I think there's a passage there that talks about that. So Paul, to some extent, is countering that. But still, it's good principles for us to follow, even so, in general. Verse 14, but notice here how strongly he's making this statement. But if anyone does not obey our message through this letter, take note not to associate with him in order that he may be put to shame. And again, I want to emphasize those who are lazy, just refuse to work. And do not consider him an enemy, but admonish him as a brother. So that's, if you like, the general principles of work as far as the Christian is concerned. And if we go back into 1 Thessalonians 4 and verse 12, the reason is so that you may live decently towards those outside. And this other passage talked about maybe able to even help those outside, or help other people even within the church as well, and may have need of nothing. That's the overall principle. That to get ourselves into that state, we need to be willing to work. I don't feel too guilty anymore about not being able to work in some areas. I mean, we've worked ourselves into a situation where we have the money we need to do what we want. So I do fulfill at least this part, even though I can't do a lot of things that a lot of other people can do, and can't do as much as I'd like to be able to do. But nonetheless, you live decently towards those outside and may have need of nothing. That's the overall aim that work should get us to, if we can. If we've got to that position, what about retirement? I don't have a problem at all with people who retire if they've got the support behind them to retire. They've got themselves possibly into that state. And we have retirement, which we've paid into most of our lives as well, which is legitimate. If a person wants to carry on working, that's fine. Okay. Now, there's a passage that I'm going to look at in the end if we have time, and I think we will have. It's Matthew 25, 14 through 30. We're not going to turn there just yet. But that's talking about the talents. One person was given 5 talents, 1 2, 1 1. And what was criticized about the 1 talent was that he didn't make use of that talent. The 5 talent person doubled his money. The 2 talent person doubled his money. They made use of what talents they had to produce more. But the person who only was given the 1 talent and hid it and returned the 1 talent was heavily, heavily criticized. So, and in the process, the ones who were given more as a result of what they'd been given, they were given more. In other words, they've given the 5 talents, they produced another 5 talents, then they were given even more because they were productive. So, kind of to me, that idea seems to be that if we are able to use what abilities we have to be more effective in whether it's business or in work or whatever, that we should do that. I know as such the passage is talking about what's going to happen at the end of time when Jesus returns. But the illustration used involves our activity here on earth. And in general, where Jesus uses some sort of an illustration, it's from a real situation. He doesn't just make a situation where you've got spacemen and, a non-existent situation. He takes a situation which we all understand on earth and he gives it a heavenly meaning. So to me, that passage, the meaning is we should try and better ourselves where we can. But what is to be the attitude towards that process of improving in our business, in our standing, in whatever it is we're trying to improve on? In other words, what is to be the motivation for doing this in this process of improving ourselves financially, standing, etc.? There's a couple of passages I want to look at. The first one, not immediately obvious, but I think it does have application for us. That's Ephesians chapter 6, verses 5 through 9. Slaves, obey your earthly masters with fear and trembling. Now, I know this is talking about slaves, but it is talking about the principle that the slave is to do his job by. Verse 6, So slaves, obey your earthly masters with fear and trembling, in the sincerity of your heart as to Christ. So the slave, who was the absolute bottom of the pile when it came to workers, he was to do it from a sincere heart, as if he was doing it for Christ. Now, if Christ asked you to do something, wouldn't you do the very best effort you could, or the very best job that you possibly could to please him? Absolutely, we would. In effect, that's what Paul or Paul is asking the slaves to do in a sincere heart. In other words, do it properly. Don't do it complaining, carrying on, resentfully. Don't stop work when the master leaves. Do it sincerely, do it properly, and do it as if you are doing it for Christ. So the motivation for what we do, I think, even in work, and even for the lowest of the workers, they should have this attitude. We should be doing what we do as if we're doing it for Christ. And if that doesn't make our work more enjoyable, it should. And then in verse 6, not while being watched, or some translations have it man pleasers. We have a gentleman at home who's a nice guy in a lot of ways, very good worker when you're there. When you're not there, everything stops. But so long as I'm there, he does an excellent job. So not while being watched as people pleasers, but as slaves of Christ, doing the will of God. And the will of God is that we're very sincere in the work that we do, and we do it well. From the heart. Verse 7, serving with good will as to the Lord and not to people. So when we've got a boss, we're a lot better off than these slaves. We should be doing the work for the boss who's willing to pay us as if he was the Lord. Serving with good will, trying to do a good job for that person. Verse 8, because you know that each one of you, whatever good he should do, this he will receive back from the Lord, whether slave or free. If we do a good job in our job or in our business or whatever it is, God will repay us for that effort that we've put forth in heaven. Verse 9, and masters do the same thing to them, giving up, not threatening them, knowing that both their Lord and yours is in heaven, and there is no partiality. Okay? To me, that gives a very good picture of the attitude that we should have as a worker. We are way better off than any slave. And yet even the slave, the bottom of the pile, was to do his work in a good way, in a conscientious way, serving his owner to the very best of his ability, because he's a Christian. So surely that must apply even more to us as paid workers. Then Colossians chapter 3, starting in verse 23, whatever you do, notice whatever you do, not just talking about what we do when we come to church or when we do in a sport that we really enjoy. Whatever we do, everything we do, accomplish it from your soul, as to the Lord and not to people, because you know that from the Lord you will receive the reward of the inheritance. We're to do the best job we possibly can, because in the end God will reward us tremendously, more so than we could possibly gain here on earth. Serve the Lord Christ, for the one who does wrong will receive back whatever wrong he has done, and there is no partiality. The wrong there seems to be not doing our work as if we're doing it for the Lord. So again, a very strong passage as far as what we're supposed to be doing as workers in whatever field we're involved in. 1 Timothy 5 and verse 8, but if someone does not provide for his own relatives, and especially the members of his own household, he has denied the faith and is worse than an unbeliever. So if we're able to work and we don't work, as a Christian, it says we've denied the faith. Being willing to work and provide for our own is part of our religious undertakings, if you like. And just got a few minutes. Now, there's a lot of people who work because they just love money. They're devoted to money. They want as much as they can possibly get. The Bible, too, and also to an extent, talks about that. So we have kind of two sides to the story, I think. One is we should make the most of what abilities, what talents we have, even in the area of making a living. But on the other hand, that's not to cloud our life too much. Let's have a look at 1 Timothy 6 verses 8 through 10. But if you have food and clothing, with these things we will be content. In other words, if you've got more than that, it's an extra, but we need to realize it's an extra. If all we've got is food and clothing, as Christians, that should be enough. But those who want to be rich fall into temptation and a trap and many foolish and harmful desires, which plunges those people into ruin and destruction. If you have an overwhelming desire to be rich, that's going to get you into trouble. Whether you'll become dishonest because of it, whether you won't treat other people correctly because of it, or whatever the purpose. And then in verse 10, for the love of money is a root of all evil. Notice the love of money, not having money, but the love of money, by which some, because they desire it, have gone astray from the faith and have pierced themselves with many pains. So we have to moderate this idea of going all out to make as much money as we possibly can. I think if a person has the one talent and he just is only able to provide for himself and his wife and his family, fair enough. So long as he's not being lazy, so long as he's going out and using that one talent, fair enough. But if a person has 5 talents, he has the ability to so much more do so. There's nothing wrong with him doing that. That's what that passage says. And pretty much automatically, he will become richer than the one talent man. It's just the way it is. It's making use of what we have that matters. Okay, Hebrews 13:5. Your lifestyle must be free from the love of money, being content with what you have. For he himself has said, I will never desert you and I will never abandon you. So overwhelmingly, we need to realize that no matter what we get on this earth, it's more important to rely on God to look after us. And especially to rely on God to give us a place in heaven, not try to buy that place in heaven, if you like, by riches. Okay, I want to just finish off with a passage from James. It's James 4, verses 13 through 17. And here this is to do with business. Come now, you who say, today or tomorrow we will travel to such and such a city and spend a year there and carry on business and make a profit. He's not condemning this at all. He's using a real situation. Okay, let's go to such and such a town, let's set up shop, let's make money. Then in verse 14, you who do not know what will happen tomorrow, what your life will be like. For you are a smoky vapor that appears for a short time and then disappears. Instead, you should say, notice he's not condemning setting up in business. But what he is, if you like, condemning is keeping God out of that picture. What we should say instead is, rather than let's us go and set up business, if the Lord wills, we will live and do this or that. We're still, if we want to go in business, if we can ask God and depend on God to bless us, that's what we should be doing, especially as Christians. But now you who boast in your ignorance, all such boasting is evil. Therefore, the one who knows the good to do and does not do it to him is sin. So I think the biblical concept of work is that we should make the most of our talents and we shouldn't be lazy. We should work to provide for our own. We should not be in need. God doesn't want us to be in need. He doesn't want us to be poverty-stricken. That kind of goes against the mentality of that religious people should be poverty-stricken. That's not what the Bible says at all. And if we want to go into business, absolutely, that's a good thing to do. But that whole process must not exclude God from the picture. I must admit, when I look back at a few of my deals over the years, I don't know how they were successful, except that God was involved. When we look at the theory of what you should do to get a success. We didn't do most of that. It just fell into our lap, you know. God is working with us if we are willing to give him that first place, even in our work and even in our business. And we need to keep that in mind. And if he chooses not to bless us, that's up to him. So don't give up if your business isn't doing quite as well as you think it should be, or your work isn't doing as well as it should. Okay. I'm a bit relieved that didn't go too bad.